In the 19th century, when European travelers went to the Ottoman Empire, something that they almost always mentioned were the whirling dervishes. The dervishes, whose name means those who have chosen the road of suffering, had a religious ceremony where they would wear long flowing robes and cone-shaped hats and spin around together in formation, so a group of them make this whirling motion in order to perform mystical aspects of their faith. So one early 19th century writer described it as, "Their curious, beautiful, and mysterious dance induced a dream of order and beauty produced out of chaos, or the harmonic revolutions of the planetary systems." The reason they're performing this ritual is in celebration of the Sufi poet Gelatin Rumi, who lived in the Turkish city of Konya in the 13th century. He was from Afghanistan, but he was fleeing the Mongol invasions. The legend goes that he's said to have invented whirling when he first spun himself into an ecstatic trance in the 13th century. And this ritual is performed frequently in Turkey today, and if you ever watch any tourism promotional videos from the Turkish Ministry of Culture, there is a 100% chance that they're going to show images of the whirling dervishes. So they'd be costumed in robes and lofty cone-shaped hats, and they would dance to music that contains a flute, a zither, a drum, and a woodwind instrument, a lute. And by doing the action, they're celebrating the writings of Rumi, who wrote a lot on theology and mysticism, and he's widely beloved today in not only the Islamic world, but a lot of other parts of the world as well. Rumi was born in Afghanistan in 1207, and by the time he died in 1273, he was widely revered for his quest for spiritual enlightenment. He's best known as the author of the 26,000 couplet Mesnevi, which expressed his spiritual devotion, and one legend says that he dictated it to a scribe while whirling around a pillar in his home. He said that dancing is not rising to your feet painlessly like a speck of dust blown around the wind. Dancing is when you rise above both worlds, tearing your heart to pieces and giving up your soul. So the dance that the whirling dervishes do, which is called the sema, has a lot of symbolism, where one hand is stretched upward, the idea is they take wisdom from God, and then another hand is put downward where they pass it on to man. The conical hat that they wear is said to represent the dervish's tombstone, and the white tunic they wear is his funeral shroud. The whirling itself is supposed to represent an attempt to see God in every direction of the compass, the rotation of the planets, and the cycle of seasons. And the flute that plays the same tune over and over and over again is supposed to represent the sound of the trumpet that will awake the dead on Judgment Day. All right, so that's a little bit of a description of the whirling dervish ceremony. But it's a really good entry point to discuss religion in the Ottoman Empire. And in this episode of Ottoman Lives, we're going to be looking at the figure of the Holy Man. This religious ceremony, the whirling dervishes, is celebrated by a religious order called the Rumi, and it was started by this man who was a poet. He wasn't a theologian. And that's a good way to describe the kind of scattered religious practice that existed in the Ottoman Empire. You had really orthodox practices of Islam where scholars would receive traditional training, they would know Arabic, they would know traditional Islamic sources, but then you had these heterodox breakaway groups like the Rumi. You had more mystical practices of Islam that if we're going to compare things in a European context, like in Europe, you might have high Catholicism practiced by priests, but then you would have the Protestant Reformation, you would have much more simple practices of faith that would be done by Puritans or Baptists or people that didn't have any religious ornamentation. Now, the analogy isn't perfect because there was never really anything like a Reformation within Islam where there was a conscious break within the religion. There's a Sunni-Shia split. I'm not going to get into all that. But the point being is that in the Ottoman Empire, you have the orthodox high Islam, but then you have the low Islam, where you can have mystical groups and mystical orders and dervishes and religious figures that are seen as a lot more unruly and that authorities really don't like very much because they're not decentralized and they're not stitched into the mainstream of Islam. The Ottoman Empire also has a lot of mountains, and if you want to understand how religious heterodoxy works, if you just look at a map and find where the mountain ranges are, you can almost perfectly pinpoint where breakaway religious groups or heterodox religious groups will be, because if you're up in the mountain, you can just evade authorities much more easily. You're not going to be controlled by central authorities as much because the taxman won't come up as frequently, the army won't go up there as frequently, and other government functionaries won't go up there. So if you have a breakaway religious movement that you want to practice, the mountains are where it's at. So that is a little glimpse into the complexity of religion in the Ottoman Empire. In this episode, I'm going to be focusing on all the differences within Islam, but you could find plenty of practice of Judaism in the Ottoman Empire in cities like Thessalonica. Christianity is all over the place in the Ottoman Empire. The head of the Orthodox Church is still in Istanbul today, the ecumenical patriarch. So there are lots of Orthodox Christians. There are Catholics there, starting with Franciscans going into the Balkans. With the Protestant Reformation, there are Protestant missionaries who come in the 1800s, and there are Christians who convert from Orthodoxy or Catholicism to Protestantism. So every stripe of Christianity that you could imagine is in there as well. So you'll find way more religious diversity in the Ottoman Empire than you would in probably any European country or the United States today. The difference is that the Ottoman Empire wasn't trying to create this universal identity of being an Ottoman citizen. From the government standpoint, they were happy for these different groups of people to do their own thing, speak their own language, practice their own religion, and as long as they didn't create riots, no harm. But what did religious practice look like, and what was it like to be a holy man in the Ottoman Empire? Let's take a look at that right now.